I'd like to introduce to you Gyorgy Tokovicz. He's 15 years practitioner in Agile, and he does training and consulting. And I want to give the word to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Marcus. I was wondering if you managed to pronounce my name because not many can. So if you want to call me, like, just please call me Toko. It's much easier for everyone. Thanks a lot. Yes, so my name is Gyorgy Tokovicz, Toko, if you want to call me like that. And as Marcus mentioned, I'm in this Agile thing now for more than 15 years. I started my career, actually, I graduated as a software engineer, so I have software engineer background. And then I also spent 10 plus years in different management positions in IT. So mainly in software development area. I also worked a little bit on IT operation part. So I also know how things are going there. And I joined Raiffeisenbank International 3.5 years ago. Currently, I'm a trainer and a helper there, like working with teams on their Agile journey. And before that, I worked with a consultancy company that was specialized in Agile adoptions. Worked mainly with multinational clients, mostly large companies, even geographically distributed companies on their Agile. And I like to position myself as somebody who is working on the field with the teams on concrete stuff. So this is about me. And today we have a very, very easy, simple topic, dependencies, right? It's like easy as pie. Probably most of you who are in the talk faced some kind of dependency. Most probably this is why you are here. I would like to tell you in advance that I'm not here to give you bold statements or advices on the topic. I don't dare to do that because this is such a complex area. But I would like to rather just share my experience and a few techniques that worked in my career working with teams on their Agile journey. So let's start maybe right now with the definition. So what is a dependency? Dependency, and I will read it out loud. Dependency is a state of relying on somebody or something for something. Yeah, this is quite trivial so far, right? Common sense. This is what dependency is. But the interesting part is the second part, especially when it's not normal or not necessary. And working with Agile teams, I experienced something similar. So most of the dependencies are not treated right at the first place. They are somehow automatically accepted instead of treated properly. And this is actually what we are searching for the answer today, how to treat dependencies and what is the best approach, if any, towards dependency management and dependencies on an Agile team. So let's start with a question to go back to the roots. Is having a dependency a problem? Or maybe I can even rephrase the question a bit, like, how big problem is it to have a dependency on an Agile team? Now let me share two stories with you immediately. About 7.5 years ago, I worked with a team in a large telco company, and they started Scrum on their own, and after several sprints, they still didn't have the anticipated benefits of Scrum and Agile, so they asked for external help. And then I went there working with the team, and the first touch point with the team was that I observed the sprint review meeting. And they had 3-week-long sprints, and actually what I saw on the review was really frightening. So what they delivered, and I'm going to put it from the engineering and software craftsmanship perspective, what they delivered in the 3-week-long iteration was a new database table created in a database and 2 additional fields in an already existing database. And first I thought that, and of course this was rubbed as user stories, like if you like it, but this was what they crafted as a software engineer. And first I thought that I seriously misunderstood something. And after the review meeting, we got into the conversation like, guys, do I understand correctly that and said, yes, this is all that we delivered. And we started an open discussion about that. And it turned out that they had a previous release. They had, back in those days, really huge releases with long release cycles, like quarterly plus releases. And the previous release was a big failure, full of bugs, and ended up with a serious customer dissatisfaction. So the management thought that they should act up on it and do something about that. So they told the team, put your quality gates in your definition of done. Here are they. Here they are. So they were kind of forced to put the following things to their definition of done. External code review with this guy, who was the super trooper Jedi programmer guy in the company, in a different country, actually working on a different project in those days, and an extra special test with a third country system testing team, just to guarantee that the current release will not be as big failure as the previous was. So you can imagine that their definition of done, and I assume that you are familiar with Scrum terms and you know what a sprint and the definition of done is. Their definition of done was full of this kind of external dependencies, code review by this, code review by that. And of course, these external guys had a very poor response time, not because they didn't care, but rather because they was really overloaded with this kind of centralized special activities. So since they couldn't finish their task in terms of the definition of done, they couldn't deliver 90% of the features they wanted to. Okay, so this was one case. Another case was, then I worked with a financial institution, actually an investment banking company, and one of the IT managers, who was the line manager of the team I started working with, got a goal in his yearly goal system, sometimes we call it MBO, managed by objective system, to significantly reduce the cost because the IT delivery was quite expensive. It was perceived by the senior management. So he got this cost-cutting constraint, cost-saving constraint, and he figured out that, oh, these developer guys are really expensive, but what if I outsource the testing in another country? So they did. They outsourced the testing part of the whole value creation chain to another country, even to another continent. And guess what happened? The lead time was increased seriously. So the developer guys had no effect on the testers. They had no clue when they start testing and what they will start with, right? So what we did is we visualized this on the Kanban board, and we started measuring the waiting time, which I highly recommend you if you are something like, if you are in a similar situation, then always measure this waiting time for external dependencies, because data beats opinion. Management mostly understands data and doesn't want to deal with emotions or perceptions. So we measured the waiting time, and after 1.5 months, we went back to the management that here is the data, here is the proof. The lead time increased on average by 3 weeks. How about that? And we, expected like the miracle, and the management told us like, okay, guys, don't worry. In our market, it's still acceptable. So we are happy with this lead time. Our bigger constraint or goal was this cost cutting. So how big problem is it? It depends merely on the context, what you are in. So I think there is no right or wrong answer to this question. The answer is that it depends on your context and probably on your organizational goal, right? So in the previous example, it was a huge organizational goal to be adaptive because they had small companies coming up, the competitors wanted to beat them. So it was crucial for them to get to the market on time. And in the latter case, it was just a simply stronger organizational constraint to save some cost. Both cases contained heavy external dependency on the team. So it depends on the context. This is my first thought on the topic. Let's have a few other examples. I want to show you what kind of dependencies I faced with during the years. So this is a quote, and actually I quote now developers mainly, who said exactly like the things like this. Let's take the first one. It says like, we have to wait for the route selection team. Only they have this special type of knowledge in the company. We cannot move on because we are blocked. And this was a company I worked with a bit, who delivers these navigation software into cars. So if you drive a car, Mercedes-Benz, Mazda, whatever you drive, and you have a navigation system in the car, this was one of the companies who developed software to this navigation system. And they had a small teams full of specialists who only dealt with this route selection thing. And this small specialist team was full of brilliant-minded mathematicians. So it was really a scarce knowledge in the company. It was not easy to spread. It was not easy to learn by the others. On the other hand, 70–80% of the company was depending on this small team. So it's kind of an external dependency, which is called expertise dependency. Or I can give you another example very quickly from the recent years. I worked with a team who, in a bank, who delivered mobile app for their customers, and they was working on the international payment feature. And there is a lady in the company who is called the mother of payments in the company. She knows everything about the payment systems, processes, data, externals, networking, whatever you can imagine. And then it happened that the lady went for 3 weeks holiday. And in the middle of the sprint, despite the fact that they carefully planned together with this lady ahead, there was a special use case in one feature that they couldn't finish testing because it required the special data they didn't think of. And of course, since the lady was on holiday, it automatically affected a set of features they couldn't finish within the sprint. This is also something like an expertise dependency on the teams. Okay, let's move on. Let's have another example. Quote, we couldn't deliver feature B because it turned out during the sprint that the CRM team didn't do their part, although it was planned and agreed on upfront, again, carefully planned. What happened here is it was a loan application process for already existing customers, and from the CRM system, which was handled by the completely separate team, they have to select data dynamically, which customer segment should be applied this kind of loans in this loan application process. And since they couldn't finish their part, this team who was dependent on them automatically failed delivering this feature, even if they could have finished theirs. So this is what I can call requirement dependency, which means that two teams or two or more teams coordinated effort is needed to finish a kind of an end-to-end requirement. Let's see the next one. Quote, sometimes we have to wait 1 or even 2 months for the external system. They have different priorities, no alignment here. I had a particular case with a team who worked with an external vendor, and this external vendor delivered one of the key components, the central components of the architecture. Namely, it was actually the core banking system of that company. It was also a bank, since I'm working for a bank now. And then what happened is that this vendor company offered their solution as an off-the-shelf product. So they had separate clients, multiple clients. And when they released, they had to take care of each and every client priorities. And in that particular time period, our team was deprioritized because there were other more important customers for that, right? So this kind of external dependency happens when there is no chance for getting the knowledge in. I know even cases when the code is not owned by the company, but the vendor. So this kind of dependency can be called, in any case, similar to this, maybe a technical dependency. Or another example for that, just not to go with the vendor case, but the internal case, when there is no shared code ownership, and then architecture is mainly built, or the organization is mainly built in component teams who have to work together to deliver something end-to-end to the customer. Oftentimes we experience like, this is my code, this is my component, don't touch it, you cannot have even access to it. On the other hand, I need to do something for you in order to deliver your feature, right? So this is kind of a technical dependency. And I have to say that these dependencies very rarely exist on themselves. Most of the cases, there is a combination or a meshing of these dependencies on teams. Sometimes it's not even possible to decide, not even needed maybe, to decide what kind of dependency are we talking about here. Let's go for another example. Quote, actually, this is really a word-by-word quote. The developer guy put it on the retrospective on the wall. the rigid mandatory company release process with quarterly shipments forces us into unnecessary deadlines. We are faking Scrum. All right. So what's the problem with that? There is an external mandatory process that has to be followed by Agile teams. And I think this typically happens, and I've seen it happening in many large companies, that Agile is treated like just another way of working, and we think that Agile is a kind of Lego box that you put into the existing company processes, and it will work. Unfortunately, it will not, but I can tell you about several other examples. For instance, the centralized demand management process. I know even cases when the product owners have to go to the centralized demand manager process in order to get back to their teams with something that is validated by the demand management team. This is really crazy, right? Or maybe a few other cases. When I worked with a large software development outsourcing company who was contracted by a telco company to deliver software for them. And the software company was forced to work in the systems of the telco company. Practically, it meant that they had to log in via VPN to their system, to their source code management system, and so on and so forth, and their testing systems. And both the VPN connection and the system themselves on the telco side were so slow that one of the developers told me that, you know, Toko, when I finish the development, I go for a 30-40 minutes long coffee session. And if I'm lucky, the build has finished by the time I'm back, so I can start testing my code. But this is another thing that should be really, based on my opinion, strictly avoided, and this might be called a process dependency, when an external process just have an ugly effect on the Agile teams. Next one is something similar to that, and the quote was that the outage of the shared integrated test environment hindered us in finishing the testing of half of the stories. And actually this outage was a planned outage. It was just not communicated upfront clearly that there's going to be an outage in the shared integrated test environment. First of all, there should be no shared integrated test environment in an ideal system. Second, this shared resource automatically means that if the things hit the fan, it will block several teams. Like the Agile teams wants to release frequently, wants to test frequently, want to retest frequently, want to re-release frequently. And if they are hindered by this kind of external activities, it will not happen. But the first example that I gave you with the definition of the full of external dependencies, external code reviews, this is the very same category. We can call it activity dependency. When something like an external activity have to be performed, like a test environment restoration or an external code review, in order to deliver or finish delivering something in the team. So based on that, having said that, what's the impact of the dependency? Let's have a quick look at that. Yeah, there is a trivial part, right? And what I will show you now is called a causal loop diagram. Those who are not familiar with the causal loop diagram, the diagram consists of mainly two building blocks. There are words like this, the number of dependencies and amount of coordination needed. And there are links or arrows between the two words. And these words are variables of a bigger system. And these links or arrows show the relationship between the two variables. So in this particular case, if the number of dependencies go up on a team, obviously, or most probably, the amount of coordination needed to deliver something end-to-end will also increase. So if the arrow points from one to the other, it means that if it's increasing, the other one is also increasing. And if it's decreasing, the other one is also decreasing. So going back with, going ahead with that, the increased amount of dependency most probably automatically means the needed amount of coordination will be increased, since I have to have a meeting with this, I have to have a shared planning with that, and coordination takes time. And since coordination takes time, sometimes involve significant amount of time, there is a really good chance, almost like a definition, by definition, probability, if I can mix these two slightly contradicting terms, that the lead time of the whole delivery will increase. Like the amount of coordination is increased. I need more time to sync with this, with that. It turns out that they couldn't do it. We have to fix it. We have to have another meeting, another planning, la, 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 la. So the lead time for sure will increase. And the longer lead time will lead to less adaptiveness. If you see a little circle on an arrow, it means that the effect or the relationship is reversed. So the increased lead time will lead to decreased adaptiveness, so decreased ability to react to things. Since we have a longer lead time, we will have a longer feedback cycle from the market or from the users if we are heading the right direction, right? This is common sense. So far, it's really trivial, okay? So dependency, amount of coordination, lead time, decreased adaptiveness. And if your organizational goal, your long-term organizational goal is adaptiveness, probably this is a realistic scenario. But this is only one side of the coin. I would like to show you another, maybe even more painful connection here, which is oftentimes overlooked or ignored. If we go on, I will a bit position myself like this. If we go on and then say that, okay, the number of dependency most probably in a team will decrease the number of successfully finished items within the iteration. So more dependency a team has, the less items they will finish, most probably. Not necessarily, but most probably. Since they don't finish enough items, it has a hidden and a bit delayed cause or effect on the motivation level of the people. And this is oftentimes not taken seriously by the senior management. Maybe they are not even aware of that on time. What does it mean? If the team cannot finish their work, if the team failed with delivering the purpose they wanted to achieve in this iteration or sprint, if you are doing Scrum, they will have after a while this feeling of continuous unsuccessful delivery. We are not successful, we couldn't make it, we couldn't do it. And on the top of that, the reaction or the typical reaction of a traditional management in this case is that these guys stop delivering, they don't deliver. Why don't they deliver? I start pushing them to deliver more, to increase their delivery. I just heard it like this year from a board member. I want the team to increase their velocity, right? This is a really bad sign when a board member starts talking about velocity, because this probably leads to a heavy misunderstanding of the whole goal behind agility. So since the motivation is decreasing, and this double line here means that this effect is delayed on time, it will not happen immediately, it's probably delayed, maybe after a few months, the motivation will really go down. And actually, there is a sign that you can really sense when the retrospective starts to erode. So if you hear it on a retrospective that the team members say that, why should we have the retrospective at all? We are just repeating ourselves continuously and nothing happens, nothing changes, no improvement. Nobody removed this dependency on us because most probably the team is not enough. They don't have enough power to remove this dependency. Then they don't want to do the retro. They don't see value in the retrospective. So the motivation part will go down. They don't fulfill their purpose. They don't even feel that they have autonomy to deliver something because it's not in their power. And it unfortunately increases the number of good developers leaving the company. I actually witnessed that this year. So really cool developers said like, okay, we had enough of this struggling. We just simply change the company, right? And today, the labor market for good developers is really tempting. So if you want to find, you're a good developer, want to find a good job, it will not take you more than 2 days, I believe. So that's a hidden effect of dependencies. And it doesn't stop here, unfortunately, because if good quality developers leave the company, and the not that good quality developers stay with the company, it most probably involves bad quality code, right? The code quality will also go down, will decrease, and worse code quality will automatically mean more bugs. If we have more bugs, we have to spend more time on bug fixing. If we spend more time on bug fixing, we don't spend enough time on innovation or feature delivery, which might easily lead to decreased adaptiveness, since we don't deliver features to get feedback from the market to test our hypothesis, but we are fixing bugs. Of course, this model is a very simplified model. It can be really more complicated one because I really simplified the whole domain. But I wanted to give you the message of it's not only the lead time that will be hit by the dependency, but the motivation, and then actually good developers. We lose as a company good developers because of the dependencies not handled properly. And what I want to very quickly show you is a concrete examples from one of my teams, or actually the teams I work with. These are two development teams developing a mobile platform application, mobile app for a company. And what you see here in these red bubbles are the unsuccessful sprint, in terms of that they didn't achieve the sprint goal. They were not even close. So all these blue X's meant like unsuccessful sprints in terms of not achieving the sprint goal or not even close to it. And if you have a lot of that, you see like consecutively 4 and 3 cases of these kind of failures. This is what really demotivates the people and leads to almost irreversible damage to the company. All right, so after that question, is having a dependency a problem, probably can be answered a bit more easily. I still don't know the right answer. I still think that there is no good or bad answer. It depends on your organizational goal, unfortunately, right? So it depends on the goal. If your goal is long-term adaptiveness, then most probably dependencies are really something that hurt. And actually, it's a real struggle for many teams. And the next point I want to tackle now here is that what is the automatic reaction of having dependencies? I will manage them, right? I will figure out something. I will introduce some more coordination. I will introduce a big room planning, right, to handle dependencies. I also witnessed the team who figured out that they have a lot of dependencies, and management decided to introduce this quarterly big room planning. And one of the coaches, local coaches, showed me a picture of a photograph whiteboard where they visualized with threads the dependencies, and it was really like a spider net, and they were really proud of that. They got to this level of agility that they now have their big room planning. Actually, they did nothing but postpone the real issue. They treated the dependencies in a bad way. So what is, in my opinion, the right way to treat the dependency? A first reaction, especially in the traditional management, is that I manage the dependencies somehow, I treat them somehow, instead of removing them relentlessly, right? So when I face a dependency with a team, my first question is always like, can I get rid of this dependency instead of managing the dependency, instead of introducing an additional coordination role, like typically a feature owner, or I heard like epic owner. So this is a big stuff full of dependencies. Let's nominate one of the analysts as an epic owner, and he or she will coordinate. So instead of this, we should really rigorously take another view and check whether we can eliminate these dependencies, right? And in most of the cases, I think the dependencies come from poor organizational design and evolutionary organizational design. In most of the large companies, architecture, you know, this famous Conway's law, follow the organizational structure, which automatically means like dependencies among the teams. And instead of rethinking the structure and killing the status quo, we try to introduce an additional coordination and governance layer on the top of the teams, which is really sometimes a disaster. So that's easy like pie, right? You just like eliminate dependencies. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. So in my previous example, for instance, when we had the external vendor who delivered the core banking system for a bank, I mean, it's not realistic simply to tell them that, guys, tomorrow we don't need you, we will have another core banking system from tomorrow on, right? It's just not realistic. So in my view, there are two extremes of the scale. One extreme is I can really remove the dependency because either long run or short run or midterm, but I can do it, or it's not possible at all, so I have to mitigate it somehow. And what I would like to show you now is a few tips that how I treat or how I saw things happening in dependency management in agile teams. So what I would like to show you now is a simple system. On the y-axis, actually, you can see the impact that we can achieve on dependency removal or handling dependencies with this certain action. And on the x-axis, you can see the effort needed in terms of time, money, energy, or company politics to have this impact. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. First one, and then please don't expect any revolution here because probably most of you know these techniques and you are familiar with that. I just want to point out a few things. First one is the so-called gatekeeper technique. If you are using Scrum, definition of ready might sound familiar to you. The definition of ready is a state of backlog items that we describe that when a backlog item is ready for development for the team. And then I had actually a case when I worked with a company who developed their customer portal, completely redeveloped the customer portal, and they were heavily depending on a backend system. And this backend system, again, similar to the other example, was developed by an external company in an external city. So it was just simply not possible, mainly to contractual reasons and legacy reasons, to get this company into the building and sit together with the portal development team and do the things together as a real end-to-end cross-functional, cross-component team. It was not possible due to constructual reasons. On the other hand, we had a huge time constraint because it was a huge pressure from the market to modernize this portal solution. And then we tried the work in the traditional way that, okay, the front-end portal team developed something and the back-end team specified the interfaces. And when it came to integration, 9 out of 10 integration failed because the data was not from that database, the interface was not that interface, the name was different, the length was different, the data type was different, and so on and so forth. So continuously failing caused the team to really be upset and angry. And then we figured out that we strengthened this definition of ready. And what we did is that if we found a backlog item that was dependent on the backend interface, it was mandatory to prove that the interface is working with a SOAP UI test first before they started working on this item. And it fixed the problem on the short run. On the other hand, of course, it increases the lead time. These things are all intermediate solutions and solutions that help mitigating the impact of having dependencies, not final solutions. Please treat them like this. Second one, often overlooked, Scrum of Scrums. I go one step back. So when it comes to resolving dependencies, it's a misconception that the dependency or the issues should be resolved by the Scrum Master. It's not true. Ideally, these are resolved by the team and the management lets the team resolve them. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. Sometimes we really need to have a Scrum of Scrums. You know, the Scrum of Scrums meeting is happening between teams who are working on something shared thing. And I see a few patterns that shows the misunderstanding of the Scrum of Scrum. First of all, I saw teams who interpreted the Scrum of Scrums meeting as a community of practice for Scrum Masters. It's not that. Second, it's always the Scrum Master who goes to the Scrum of Scrum meeting. Not true. Those who work on something dependent on the other teams should go to the Scrum of Scrum meeting and resolve these dependencies. And the third one is that we have to wait for the Scrum of Scrums, or even we have to wait for the daily stand-ups to resolve something. It's not true. I mean, ideally, the team members continuously talk to each other. I know it sounds trivial and easy, but in reality, the Scrum Master really has to resolve these communication barriers even between team members in the very same team, not to mention like a multi-team product. Next one. If my Teams will work, or what is it called? Measure and visualize dependency, right? It's also something trivial. Still, I see a few anti-patterns. For instance, I see Kanban teams doing Kanban, and they have dependency, and they dedicate a separate column for the dependencies, or they blocked items, let's say, mostly dependencies actually. So if you dedicate a separate column, which is called the blocked items column in a Kanban board in your workflow, what you will do actually is to lead the focus away from dependency removal. You validate the situation. Don't do that, please. The blocked items consume the work in progress limit in a Kanban board. Never have a blocked item column. At least this is how I work, and I encourage my teams to treat dependencies. Other visualization techniques are also extremely useful, like dependency maps, like two teams or even more teams in a matrix way, they visualize their dependencies, or just visualize the waiting time for an external dependency. In my previous example, this all help drive the management attention to removing dependencies. Dynamic or extended team. It happens when sometimes we have a scarce resource, sorry for calling people resources, a scarce expertise in another team, or just as a specialist in an organization. I worked with teams where they had to work on almost the whole release on a security specific set of features, and there was only one man in the whole R&D site in the country who was the security specialist, and he was almost kind of unapproachable guy, not approachable because he has a heavy load on him due to the high demand. And then this is really not good. One of the solutions you can do here is to allocate this kind of scarce expertise to the teams for a certain amount of time, let's say for 5 sprints. And during these 5 sprints, this fully allocated external expert helps the team, is there. You don't have to wait for him. And in parallel with that, this expert will teach the teams on this special skill in the amount needed actually. Next one. Exclude teams from company legacy processes. Just right before I joined the Raiffeisen Bank International, I worked with a team in a large company, and the company decided to disrupt their market. And then they wanted to do it in a way that they completely rebranded the product, or not rebranded, this was a new product, a completely new brand, and they completely cut this out from the original organization. So these new teams, actually it was 2 teams, didn't have to comply with any of the existing company processes, no budgeting, no release process, no approvals, nothing. The CIO was present in each and every sprint review meeting. In 3.5 months, we delivered the first version of the product to market. So this is a really huge help, not to underestimate. And even I'm not fan of any, or dedicated fan of any large frameworks, but I know that less proposes sometimes in case of huge transformation, something similar. So you create a parallel company without any things from the other old company and just merge the teams one by one, or I think the magic number is like 40–50% at a time to the new company. And this is how you do it. Otherwise, the organization gravity will pull back the new teams if you leave them in the original company. This is what I'm talking about here. Next one, common planning. This also has to be mentioned that if the common planning is happening within a product area with the very same teams, that's okay. If the common planning is happening in a way that we still keep all the dependencies, but we hope that this common planning will help delivering better results, it's probably not the right thing to do. Still, sometimes it helps. I also know a company who is doing bi-weekly common planning. They are introducing Agile in small steps, and there's a huge project management related part of the company, the traditional part. And they have a bi-weekly, very short, like 1 hour meeting with all the project managers and all the product owners present, and they try to resolve these dependencies. It works temporarily fairly well. At least it increased the sense of, not the sense, but it really increased the capability of removing these dependencies on time. Dependencies are still there, but they are handled in a better way. Next one, shared code or internal open source. Now that's a tricky thing, because once you move away from technology-oriented team to really end-to-end customer-oriented feature teams, it's probably increasing the probability that you have to work on a shared code base with other teams. But still, if you manage to do it, and this is the point where engineering practices are really crucial, like continuous integration, test-driven development, mock programming, pair programming, mentoring, to have this achieved state of easily resolving the dependencies that comes from the shared code usage, then you achieve the goal. And it has a really huge impact on the company, because once you manage to work on a shared code base, it will automatically cut the necessary coordination of the dependencies. Next one, and I introduced the new color because this is the elimination part. The blue one is rather the mitigation part of the dependencies, and the green one is rather the elimination part. So if you really want to get rid of this expertise dependency, you have to build up knowledge. And oftentimes I hear like, oh, you just build T-shaped teams and M-shaped teams and multi-skill teams, like easy like this. Unfortunately not. It's really underestimated. So it requires time. I have a colleague who worked with a team recently. They started full of specialists, front-end development, back-end developer, business analyst, UX guy, tester guy, and the DevOps engineer, all specialists, nothing to do with the others part. And it took them 2.5 years to learn each other's skill. So by today, they achieved the state that any of the team members can take any of the items from the backlog, from the sprint backlog, right? With a few exceptions, of course. This is not necessarily a goal, but I just want to point out that it's possible to do, and it requires two things: willingness from the team members to learn new things, even if it's out of their comfort zone, and support from the management to let them learn, because learning will probably also hit the lead time first. Learning requires time, money, and effort. Next one, organizational change or redesign. And this is the toughest part. Many organizations I've seen working with component teams or technology-specific teams, and they try to coordinate the effort to deliver something really end-to-end to the customer. It's really a tricky thing. It's almost impossible to do. Let me just very quickly introduce two terms. A product, especially in a profit-oriented organization, is something that the customers would pay for. It consists people, systems, processes, and it has features that will ease the customer pains. Like a cake. If I go to a shop, I want to eat a cake. I don't want to eat the sponge, the cream, or something. I want to eat the cake. A component, on the other hand, is just the element, the ingredient of a cake, typically connected to some kind of special skill, and then often exists as a separate organizational unit. And if you look at the next picture, and this is really one of my teams in a simplified model, actually, these are the mobile app development teams I was already talking about. So they have iOS, Android, and microservice competencies, but in order to deliver a customer feature, they need this middleware and need core banking system modules. So they are not a feature team, because a feature team cuts through the whole architecture, delivers something end-to-end to the customer. They are component teams, right? And the real organizational change and redesign would be to move away from this component view and reshuffle the teams to this feature team setup. And once these feature teams are created, of course, it involves another dependency a better kind of dependency, the code dependency, the shared code dependency, which I mentioned previously. But actually, this shared code dependency most probably can be resolved with modern engineering practices. It's also not something really easy to do, but companies have to realize that they have to put effort in it. And I just, a few months ago, finished the work. It was just kind of an evaluation work with a team, and they have manual regression testing that takes them sometimes 1.5 months. It's just simply not possible to deliver frequent releases to the market with that amount of manuality. So for instance, test automation and test-driven development is really something that you take seriously. And then I think I'm running out of time, unfortunately, sorry for that. Just a few more thoughts on the topic. A complete architecture modernization and simplification initiative is also something very painful to do, but sometimes it's needed. I see teams and management especially who are actually afraid of removing certain architectural components because during the years we put so much money and effort in that. But if they would just remove it step by step and introduce something new, they would have a lot of benefits on the reduced lead time side. So this is what I meant by architecture simplification and reorganization. And then maybe one more thought, really the final one on scaling. This adds another level of complexity. First of all, I actually read a Martin Fowler article many years ago on scaling, and he advises not to scale up first, but try to descale first. So if you look things on from another angle and try to remove all the unnecessary people from the product who are rather overhead and leave only those ones who are really good and can deliver, most probably you will have a better lead time. Second thought on scaling. I see fake scaling initiatives. So first of all, you don't necessarily scale Agile itself, right? You scale a product. When a product needs to be scaled, like more teams needed to deliver more or in parallel more, that is probably a good scaling scenario. But just for scaling because Agile is a hype, and then once you have a few teams already working in Agile and you want to extend Agile to the company, and it happens that you only rename the existing teams to squads and tribes and I don't know what, this is not scaling, this is fake scaling and it's not needed. Another kind of favorite quote of mine is that, it's not from me, of course, I heard it, but it's really true, is that if you have crap on the team level and you scale it up, you will have a scaled crap, an even bigger crap, right? And you don't want to have it. Many organizations underestimate the proficiency on the team level. So until teams master Scrum and engineering practices, don't think of scaling because you will scale up the wrong things. So, having said that, dependency management is really not an easy thing to do. Sorry for overrunning my time limit a bit. I don't know if we have still time for questions. If not, please approach me either via LinkedIn message or via email. I'm really happy to answer your questions.
There are a few
questions.
questions.
Being here with me.
In the chat, if you'd like to answer them there, maybe.
All right. I need my glasses for that.
Okay, thank you. Big applause.
Okay. All right. So Gottfried, to everyone, would you agree with the statement that the dependency is a kind of technical debt and should be treated as such? For example, made visible and managed accordingly. I would say, if you ask me, that regardless of the technical debt is being a dependency or not, you should visualize it and treat it immediately. I think technical debt can lead to serious dependency on other parts of the organization. Technical debt is rather another factor of hindering adaptiveness and agility. Maybe it can be considered as a dependency, but I wouldn't probably consider it myself as a dependency. Do you have a best practice to track waiting time? Yes, I have. Actually, it's a good practice, not a best practice. So if you are using a physical board, you just buy this timestamp in any of these office supply shops, and you just put a timestamp when you start the waiting, and you put another timestamp when you finish the waiting, and one of the team members at the end of the day just puts it in an Excel and it draws a beautiful graph. If you are using an electronic tool, for instance, Jira is a very popular tool, for instance, Jira can measure it for you. So even if you can have a cumulative flow diagram, and then you can kind of customize it and see how much waiting time you have in certain workflow steps, for instance. How would you balance refactoring of technical?
I'm sorry, I must interrupt you because next presentation is approaching. So you please change to the networking room. I posted the link in the chat. And
okay, thanks a lot again. I will copy these questions and I will do my best to answer them in the networking room.
Okay, thanks for your presentation.
Thanks a lot, guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.
Bye.